First Contact and Fear. The massive frame of Commander Rynak cast a long shadow across the pristine white floors of Deep Space Medical Station Epsilon 7. Standing at nearly 10 feet tall, his obsidian scales reflecting the stereo lighting, the Nikari warrior commanded an immediate response from everyone in the vicinity. Humans and other species instinctively pressed themselves against the walls of the corridor, their eyes wide with a primitive fear that no amount of diplomatic training could fully suppress. Rynak understood their reaction. His species had evolved as apex predators on their homeworld of Nikar Prime, where survival meant being the strongest, the most feared. Their massive frames, retractable claws, and rows of serrated teeth made them natural hunters, and their reputation had preceded them long before they joined the Galactic Coalition 3 decades ago. But today, Rynak wasn't here as a warrior. He was here as a father. In his arms, he cradled his youngest offspring, Kira, her usually lustrous emerald scales now dulled with illness. She had been refusing food for days, growing weaker with each passing cycle. The Nikari healers, with all their ancient knowledge and advanced technology, had been unable to determine the cause of her affliction. Commander Rynak. A calm voice drew his attention. Dr. Amara Patel stood before him, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid, her brown eyes showing no trace of the fear he had come to expect from humans. "I received your transmission about your daughter." Rynak's translator clicked as he responded, struggling to convert his natural growls into something the human language could capture. "Yes. Our healers, they cannot help her. They say perhaps human medical knowledge might see something we cannot." Dr. Patel nodded, already activating her diagnostic equipment. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Kira. The simple act of asking permission, of showing respect for his parental authority, made Rynak's chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. He carefully transferred his precious burden to the human's arms, fighting against millennia of instinct that screamed at him not to let his vulnerable offspring be handled by another predator species. Dr. Patel's movements were gentle but confident as she cradled Kira, her scanner humming softly. "How long has she been refusing food?" Dr. Patel asked, her eyes focused on the readings. 7 cycles, Rynak replied, his claws unconsciously extending and retracting with worry. "She cries when we try to feed her, as if it causes her pain." Dr. Patel's face lit up with understanding. "Ah, I see the problem." She moved to her medical console, still holding Kira with practiced ease. "Your daughter has developed an infection in her secondary feeding chamber. It's similar to something we see in human children, though the anatomy is different. The infection makes swallowing painful, which is why she's refusing to eat." Relief flooded through Rynak's massive frame, nearly buckling his knees. An infection. Something simple. Something treatable. "You can help her?" "Of course," Dr. Patel smiled, already preparing medication. "The treatment is straightforward. She'll need a course of specialized antibiotics, and I'll give her something for the pain. She should be feeling better within hours, though you'll want to continue the full treatment for 10 cycles. As Dr. Patel administered the medication, she began to hum softly, a simple, soothing melody that seemed to calm Kira almost immediately. The young Nikari's distressed chirps gradually subsided, and for the first time in days, she drifted into peaceful sleep. "That sound," Rynak said, fascinated. "What is it?" "An old lullaby," Dr. Patel explained, still gently rocking Kira. "A song humans have used to comfort children for generations. I found that while the words might not translate, the melody seems to have a calming effect on most species young." The next few hours transformed Rynak's understanding of humanity. He watched as Dr. Patel treated his daughter with a level of care he had never expected from a species his people had long considered physically inferior. She explained every step of the treatment, shared her knowledge freely, and showed no sign of tiring despite the length of her shift. When it was time to leave, Kira already showing signs of improvement, Rynak found himself struggling with a new concept. The humans he had encountered in diplomatic meetings had always seemed so soft, so lacking in the traditional markers of strength his people valued. Yet here was a different kind of strength, one that manifested in gentle hands and caring hearts, in the ability to ease pain and preserve life. As news of Kira's treatment spread through the Nikari community on the station, something unprecedented began to happen. More Nikari parents started bringing their children to the human medical facility. Each visit chipped away at centuries of prejudice and misunderstanding. The humans, far from being weak, possessed a strength that the Nikari had never considered, the strength of compassion. Rinak found himself returning to the medical station regularly, not just for Kira's follow-up treatments, but to observe and learn. He watched as Dr. Patil and her team handled emergencies with calm efficiency, treated patients of all species with equal care, and worked tirelessly to preserve life in all its forms. The true test of this new understanding came during the station's first major crisis. A damaged ship limped into dock, its hull breached, its crew, a mix of species including both humans and Nikari, suffering from severe radiation exposure. Without hesitation, Dr. Patel and her team rushed to help, working alongside Nikari healers who had once refused to even enter the human facility. As Rinak watched the cooperation unfold, he realized that his people had been wrong about strength. It wasn't just about physical power or the ability to dominate. True strength lay in the capacity to help others, to heal rather than harm, to bring life rather than death. That day marked the beginning of a profound change in Nikari society. The predators who had once prided themselves on their fearsome reputation began to learn the power of compassion, and in doing so, discovered a new kind of strength, one that would transform their place in the galaxy forever. Breaking barriers. The transformation that began in Deep Space Medical Station Epsilon 7's pediatric ward soon rippled through the entire station. Dr. Patel's success with Kira had opened a door that could never be closed again, but it was the events of the following months that truly cemented the changing relationship between humans and the Nikari. Lieutenant Rena Jackson stood at her post in the station's Environmental Control Center, monitoring the life support systems with practiced efficiency. As one of the few humans who worked directly with the station's Nikari engineering team, she had grown accustomed to their imposing presence. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the panic in Chief Engineer Vex's voice when he burst into the control room that day. "The hatchery," he growled, his translator barely keeping up with his agitated speech. "Something's wrong with the environmental controls in the hatchery." The Nikari hatchery was a sacred space, a carefully controlled environment where their eggs were kept during the final stages of development. The species' reproduction rate was naturally low, making each successful hatching crucial to their population's survival. Any threat to the hatchery was a threat to their future. Rena didn't hesitate. "Show me," she commanded, already gathering her diagnostic equipment. The fact that Vex had come to her, a human, instead of handling it internally spoke volumes about both the severity of the situation and the growing trust between their species. The hatchery was housed in a separate section of the station, its environmental systems specially modified to mimic the conditions of Nikar Prime. As they rushed through the corridors, Rena's mind raced through possible causes for the malfunction. The Nikari were excellent engineers, but their focus on strength and durability sometimes meant they overlooked subtle system interactions. Inside the hatchery, dozens of worried Nikari parents hovered near their egg clutches. The temperature was rising steadily, already several degrees above the optimal range. Nikari eggs required precise conditions during their final development stage. Too much variation could be catastrophic. "The primary environmental control system is locked," Vex explained, leading her to the main console. "We can't override it, and the backup systems aren't responding." Rena's fingers flew over the controls, her eyes scanning the system readouts. Years of working with both human and Nikari technology had given her a unique perspective on how the two systems integrated, or sometimes failed to integrate properly. "There," she muttered, spotting the problem. The neural interface is interpreting the backup system's signals as an attack. It's a compatibility issue between your biological security protocols and our digital failsafes. The Nikari used partially organic technology, their systems incorporating living tissue that responded to their natural biochemistry. It was incredibly advanced, but it could also be surprisingly primitive in its reactions. Right now, the system was essentially having an immune response to the human-designed backup protocols. "I need direct access to the neural core," Rena announced, already pulling tools from her kit. "And I'll need at least one Nikari to provide biochemical authorization." Vex stepped forward without hesitation, extending his clawed hand toward the interface panel. 20 minutes ago, the idea of a human accessing the hatchery's neural core would have been unthinkable. Now, with 43 clutches of eggs at risk, there was no time for traditional boundaries. Working together, Rena and Vex initiated a complex dance of human and Nikari technologies. She used her understanding of both systems to create a bridge between them, while his biological connection provided the authentication the neural interface needed to accept her changes. The temperature began to stabilize, but they weren't done yet. The underlying compatibility issue needed to be resolved to prevent future incidents. For the next several hours, Rena worked alongside the Nikari engineering team, teaching them about human system architecture while learning more about their biological interfaces. What emerged was more than just a technical solution. It was a true hybrid system that took advantage of both species' strengths. The Nikari's organic technology provided unparalleled security and adaptability, while human digital systems offered precision and redundancy. As the crisis passed and the last modifications were completed, Rena found herself surrounded by grateful Nikari parents. Their traditional expressions of gratitude involved elaborate displays of submission from those whose lives had been saved. But instead, they offered her something far more meaningful. They invited her to witness the hatching of the eggs she had helped save. The event would take place over several days as each clutch reached maturity. Rena spent her off-duty hours in the hatchery, watching in wonder as new life emerged under the soft, red-tinged lights. The Nikari hatchlings, despite their species' fearsome appearance, were surprisingly delicate in their first hours of life. During one particularly busy hatching period, she found herself helping to monitor the vital signs of newly emerged hatchlings while their parents were occupied with siblings still emerging. The trust implicit in allowing her to handle their most vulnerable offspring was staggering. "You understand," Vex said to her during a quiet moment, "that you are the first non-Nikari to ever witness our hatching ritual." Rena nodded, holding a scanner over a sleeping hatchling. "I understand the honor you've given me," she replied, "and I understand why these moments are so sacred to your people." "No," Vex rumbled, his translator struggling to convey the complexity of his tone. "You do more than understand. You feel it. Your heart races when a shell begins to crack. You hold your breath until a hatchling takes its first. You celebrate each successful emergence as if it were your own offspring. This is what we are learning from humans. That strength can be found in sharing joy as well as facing danger." The integration of the environmental control systems became a model for other projects throughout the station. Humans and Nikari began working together more closely, each species learning to value the other's unique perspectives and abilities. The hatchery incident had proved that their differences, rather than being obstacles, could become advantages when they worked together. More importantly, it had shown that trust and cooperation could bridge even the widest evolutionary gaps. The Nikari, who had evolved as solitary predators, were learning the power of community from humanity, and humans, often dismissed as physically weak by other species, were proving that true strength took many forms. Proving ground. The proximity alarms blared through Deep Space Medical Station Epsilon 7, with an urgency that made even the Nikari warrior's scales bristle. Captain Thalia Rodriguez rushed to the command center, her mind already racing through emergency protocols. The source of the alarm became immediately clear on the main display. A massive solar flare from the nearby star was heading directly toward the station. Time to impact, she demanded, scanning the readouts. 17 minutes, responded First Officer Kai Bennett. It's bigger than anything we've recorded in this sector. Our standard shields won't be enough. The situation was dire. Epsilon 7's location had been chosen specifically for its proximity to several major space lanes, making it a crucial medical hub. Now that same strategic position put them directly in the path of a stellar event powerful enough to overwhelm their defenses. Status of current patients, Philia asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. The station was operating at near capacity, with numerous critical cases that couldn't be evacuated in time. 87 patients in critical care, including 32 Nycari hatchlings from the recent clutch, Kai reported. Full evacuation is impossible in the time frame we have. Before Philia could respond, Commander Rinak strode into the command center, his massive frame seeming to fill the space. In the months since his daughter's treatment, he had become an unofficial liaison between the human and Nycari communities on the station. We have a possibility, he announced, his translator struggling to keep up with his urgent growls. But it will require trust. Complete trust. Philia turned to face him. We're running out of options, Commander. What do you propose? The Nycari warrior-class vessels in dock, Rinak explained. Their hulls are designed to withstand extreme conditions. If we position them in a defensive formation around the station's critical sections, they could act as additional shields. Kai finished, already running calculations. But the ships would have to be controlled manually. Their neural interfaces won't respond quickly enough on automatic. And we'd need both human and Nycari crews, Rinak added. Our pilots know the ships, but your engineers understand the station's shield harmonics. Without perfect coordination between both, the plan fails. Philia didn't hesitate. Make it happen. We have 15 minutes to save this station. What followed was a symphony of cooperation unlike anything the galaxy had yet witnessed. Nycari warrior pilots, who had spent their lives training to fight alone, found themselves shoulder to shoulder with human engineers in their sacred command chairs. The humans, for their part, had to adapt instantly to the organic controls of Nycari vessels, learning to interpret displays designed for a completely different species' sensory system. Dr. Patel's voice came over the comm system from the medical bay. We're moving all critical patients to the central sections. The Nycari parents are helping transport human children, and vice versa. Everyone's working together. In the command center, Philia watched as 12 Nycari ships moved into position, their black hulls gleaming against the starfield. Each vessel was now crewed by an unprecedented combination. A Nycari pilot neurally linked to the ship's core systems, and a human engineer managing power distribution and shield harmonics. 5 minutes to impact, Kai announced. Ships in final position. Rinak stood beside Philia, both of them watching the approaching wall of stellar energy. Whatever happens, he rumbled, today proves that our peoples are stronger together than apart. The solar flare struck with devastating force. The station's shields flared brilliant blue, reinforced by the carefully positioned Nycari vessels. Inside each ship, human and Nycari crew members worked in perfect synchronization, adjusting shield frequencies and power levels moment by moment. Warning lights flashed across every console as systems were pushed to their absolute limits. In the medical bay, Dr. Patel and her mixed team of human and Nycari medical staff worked to keep their patients stable as the station shuddered around them. Hull stress at maximum tolerance, Kai reported, his voice tight. The Nycari ships are taking the brunt of it, but they can't hold much longer. They have to, Philia insisted. We just need another 3 minutes for the flare to pass. In those 3 minutes, both species learned lessons that would reshape their understanding of each other forever. The Nycari, who had always seen their warrior ships as symbols of solitary strength, watched in amazement as human engineers helped those ships exceed their design capabilities through clever power management and shield modifications. The humans, who had sometimes dismissed Nikari biological technology as primitive, witnessed firsthand the incredible resilience and adaptability of their organic systems. Working together, they achieved what neither species could have managed alone. When the solar flare finally passed, leaving the station battered but intact, there was no celebration. Instead, there was something more profound, a quiet recognition of what they had accomplished together. The Nikari ships returned to dock, their hulls bearing the scars of their ordeal. As the crews emerged, there was no distinction between human and Nikari. They had faced death together and emerged victorious not through superior strength or advanced technology, but through trust and cooperation. In the following days, as the station returned to normal operations, something had fundamentally changed. The Nikari warriors, who had once valued solitude and individual prowess above all else, began requesting human crew members for their regular patrols. Human engineers started incorporating Nikari biological principles into their system designs. The solar flare incident became known throughout the sector as the day when two vastly different species proved that the greatest strength comes not from physical power or advanced technology, but from the willingness to trust and work together. It was a lesson that would spread far beyond Epsilon 7, influencing human-Nikari relations throughout the galaxy. Understanding strength. 6 months after the solar flare incident, Deep Space Medical Station Epsilon 7 hosted an unprecedented event, the first joint human-Nikari cultural exchange symposium. The station's largest gathering space had been transformed for the occasion, its stark medical efficiency softened by a blend of human artistic displays and Nikari ceremonial tokens. High Elder Thrax, one of the most respected leaders of the Nikari Confederacy, stood before the assembled crowd. His ancient scales bore the marks of countless battles, yet today he spoke not of warfare but of transformation. For 10 generations, he began, his translator rendering his deep growls into measured words, we Nikari have defined strength through our ability to stand alone. We saw cooperation as a sign of weakness, compassion as a luxury we could not afford. We were wrong. The assembled audience, a mix of humans, Nikari, and representatives from other species, listened in rapt attention. It was rare for a Nikari elder to admit to any kind of error, let alone to do so publicly. I have watched, Thrax continued, as human medical personnel saved our young without asking for anything in return. I have seen human engineers work alongside our warriors to protect this station, neither species attempting to dominate the other. But it was what happened after the solar flare that truly opened my eyes. He gestured to Lieutenant Rena Jackson, who had recently been promoted to Chief of Environmental Systems. When the crisis was over, the humans did not boast of their contributions. They did not seek to leverage their assistance for political advantage. Instead, they immediately began working to improve our joint defensive capabilities, to ensure we would be better prepared for the next challenge. In the months following the solar flare, the station had become a testing ground for new forms of cooperation. The Nikari hatchery now incorporated human environmental control systems, while the station's medical facilities had been upgraded with Nikari biological interfaces. Each improvement represented not just a technological advancement, but a deeper understanding between the species. Our young now learn alongside human children in shared educational spaces, Thrax observed. They play together, learn together, grow together. And in doing so, they teach us something our species had forgotten. That true strength lies not in the ability to defeat others, but in the capacity to help them grow. The symposium continued for several days, featuring presentations on everything from medical breakthroughs to engineering innovations. But the most profound discussions happened in the informal moments between sessions, as humans and Nikari shared their perspectives on life, culture, and the nature of strength itself. Dr. Patel, now serving as the station's chief medical officer, found herself in one such conversation with a group of Nikari warriors. They were discussing the concept of medical triage, the practice of prioritizing patients based on medical need rather than status or species. In our traditional healing houses, One warrior named Kex explained, treatment priority was given to the strongest, those deemed most valuable to the community's survival. It seemed logical, efficient. But efficiency isn't always wisdom, Dr. Peddle replied. Sometimes, saving those who seem weakest can reveal strengths we never imagined existed. She shared the story of a human child who had recently recovered from a severe illness, helped in part by a Naikari healing technique that had been adapted for human physiology. The child had gone on to help other young patients cope with their treatments, showing a resilience that impressed even the Naikari. The station's security teams had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Where once the Naikari warriors had worked in isolation, they now partnered with human officers, combining the Naikari's natural defensive capabilities with human tactical adaptability. The result was a security force that could handle any situation with a measured, appropriate response, rather than relying solely on intimidation. Commander Rinak, watching a joint training session, reflected on how far they had come. We used to think that humans' smaller size and lesser strength made them inferior warriors, he said to Captain Rodriguez. Now we understand that their true strength lies in their ability to find peaceful solutions while maintaining the capability for defensive action. The station's success began to attract attention throughout the galaxy. Other species, who had long kept their distance from the fearsome Naikari, began to see possibilities for cooperation. Human diplomatic missions found doors opening that had previously been firmly closed, as word spread of their unique approach to interspecies relations. Perhaps the most meaningful change could be seen in the station's youngest inhabitants. In the newly established joint recreation area, Naikari hatchlings played alongside human children, neither group showing any sign of fear or aggression. They had no preconceptions to overcome, no ingrained prejudices to unlearn. To them, cooperation was simply the natural way of things. Late one night, as the symposium was winding down, High Elder Thrax made an unscheduled appearance in the medical bay. He found Dr. Peddle teaching a young Naikari healer about human pediatric care. Their discussion focused on the importance of emotional support in the healing process. You see, Dr. Patel was explaining, physical treatment is only part of healing. The patient's mental state, their feeling of safety and support, can be just as important as any medicine we provide. Thrax watched silently, remembering how his own species had once dismissed such concepts as irrelevant to proper medical care. Now, looking at the mortality rates in facilities that had adopted human practices, he couldn't deny the evidence. Compassion wasn't just morally right, it was practically effective. We are predators, he finally spoke, drawing their attention. This will never change. It is written in our biology, our instincts, our very nature. But humans have taught us that being predators does not mean we must be threatening. That being strong does not mean we must be feared. This is perhaps the greatest lesson your species could have taught us. Legacy of Unity. 5 years after the first joint Human-Naikari Cultural Exchange Symposium, Deep Space Medical Station Epsilon 7 had transformed from a simple medical outpost into a symbol of interspecies cooperation across the galaxy. The station had doubled in size, with new wings dedicated to research, education, and cultural exchange. But more importantly, it had become a model for how different species could work together, combining their strengths rather than comparing them. Captain Rodriguez stood at the observation deck, watching as a massive Naikari battlecruiser gracefully maneuvered into dock. Unlike the warrior vessels of the past, this ship's hull bore the distinctive markings of the newly established Joint Medical Corps, a merger of human medical expertise and Naikari protective instincts that had revolutionized emergency response throughout the sector. The Sentinel of Hope has returned from the Arcturus crisis, Lieutenant Bennett reported, joining her at the window. Initial reports indicate they saved over 3,000 lives from the colony world. The Sentinel of Hope was the flagship of the Joint Medical Corps, a vessel that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Its crew was evenly split between humans and Naikari, working together to provide emergency medical support to disasters across the sector. The ship combined the intimidating defensive capabilities of a Nikari warship with the advanced medical facilities of a human hospital vessel. In the station's educational center, a new generation was growing up with a completely different understanding of strength and cooperation. Young Nikari learned healing arts alongside combat skills, while human children studied Nikari biological technology as part of their standard curriculum. The fear that had once defined interactions between the species had been replaced by curiosity and mutual respect. Dr. Patel, now serving as the director of the Interspecies Medical Academy, often found herself reflecting on how far they'd come. The academy had become the premier institution for medical training in the sector, attracting students from dozens of species. Its graduation ceremony had become a powerful symbol of unity, with students taking an oath that combined elements of the human Hippocratic Oath with traditional Nikari pledges of protection. Commander Rinak, his scales now bearing the silver sheen of middle age, had become one of the strongest advocates for continued cooperation between the species. His daughter Kira, whose illness had first brought him to the human medical facility, was now training to become one of the first Nikari pediatric specialists, combining her species' natural protective instincts with human medical knowledge. "We were so blind," Rinak remarked during a council meeting discussing the station's future expansion. "We thought we were teaching our young to be strong by teaching them to be feared. The humans showed us that true strength lies in being trusted, in being the ones others turn to for help, rather than the ones they flee from in fear." The impact of the Human-Nikari Alliance extended far beyond medicine. The successful integration of their technologies had led to breakthroughs in numerous fields. Nikari biological interfaces, once used solely for warfare, were now being adapted for everything from environmental restoration to space exploration. Human problem-solving approaches, combined with Nikari resilience, had created solutions that neither species could have developed alone. The station itself had become a beacon of hope in the galaxy. Other species that had long been locked in cycles of fear and aggression began to see a different path forward. The message was clear. Even the most fundamental differences could be bridged through understanding and cooperation. One particular evening, as the station's day cycle was winding down, a small ceremony took place in the medical bay. A group of Nikari warriors, their scales gleaming under the soft lights, stood watch as a human child underwent a critical surgical procedure. The warriors weren't there as guards. They were there as donors, their unique biology providing compounds essential for the child's treatment. Dr. Patel supervised the procedure, working alongside a Nikari healer. The sight would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. A Nikari willingly giving part of themselves to save a human child, their natural predatory instincts transformed into a fierce protective drive that extended beyond their own species. As the procedure concluded successfully, High Elder Thrax, who had come to witness this milestone, spoke to the assembled medical team. "In our ancient texts," he rumbled, his translator conveying the emotion in his voice, "there is a prophecy about a time when the Nikari would find their true strength. For generations, we thought it spoke of military might or technological power. Now we understand. It spoke of this moment, when we learn to use our strength not to dominate, but to protect and nurture." The success of Epsilon 7 led to the establishment of similar stations throughout the galaxy. Each new facility built upon the lessons learned, creating spaces where different species could come together, learn from each other, and grow stronger through cooperation rather than competition. The station's original mission, providing medical care to all species, had expanded into something far more profound. It had become a living laboratory for interspecies cooperation, proving that the most fundamental barriers could be overcome through compassion, understanding, and a willingness to see strength in its many forms. As the station's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Captain Rodriguez made a final note in her log. 5 years ago, we witnessed a moment when predators understood humanity's unmatched compassion. Today, we continue to witness something even more remarkable: the ongoing transformation of that understanding into action, creating a legacy that will shake the galaxy for generations to come. The strength we found in unity has surpassed anything we could have achieved alone, proving that the greatest power lies not in our ability to stand apart, but in our willingness to stand together.